Then we've got vitamin D. Technically a hormone, not a vitamin. D2 is going to be more of the plant-derived vitamin D, whereas D3 is the animal-derived. In our bodies, we produce D3 in our skin in response to sunlight. When we're getting vitamin D from plants or mushrooms or fungal production, it's going to be in the D2 form. Physiologically, you can see, like looking at those two molecules, they're essentially the same, right? Little difference over here. And that's about it. In terms of the overall physiology, they're going to function the same. Main sources of vitamin D, you get a good beach day going. A good beach day is going to be what? I don't know, an hour or two out in the sun with good sunlight. That can give you a good 10,000 units of vitamin D span of a good good day. I think what's the amount? Maybe about 20 minutes of daily sun exposure in like shorts and t-shirts, shorts, t-shirt kind of clothing is more than enough sunlight exposure to get vitamin D levels. The trick is, you need enough sunlight intensity. A general rule of thumb, if your shadow is longer than you are, or your shadow is longer than you are tall, or taller than you, or however you call it, you're not the sunlight intensity is not enough to actually produce vitamin D in your skin. So if you live in an environment like that, you've got to supplement either from diet or vitamins or whatever. A lot of our stuff is vitamin D fortified now. Like you look at the orange juice and milk and all that stuff. Most cereals are fortified. The discovery of vitamin D actually originated from the cod liver oil, from fish liver oil. Who thought to use cod liver oil to treat diseases? I have no idea. Like I have no idea where people come up with these ideas to try stuff, but works better than snake oil, right? Currently in the US, about 42-ish% of the population is vitamin D deficient, rough, give or take. And interestingly, it is the number one risk factor. As near as I can tell, it's the number one risk factor for developing severe COVID disease. I do not know why more outlets are not talking about that. But if you look through the literature, it's like getting vitamin D levels that are above 30 nanograms per liter is like a 90% reduction in risk of developing serious disease with COVID infection. And given that a huge percentage of the population is vitamin D deficient, you would think that would be a major thing that people would want to work on. Yeah. Yeah, tall buildings blocking out the sun. And interestingly, another point is COVID-19 infections are much worse in people with darker skin. The darker your skin, generally, those populations do worse with infection. And the darker your skin is, the less vitamin D you produce, because the melanin blocks the UV light that triggers the vitamin D synthesis. So it does explain why why all the population groups with darker skin on average, have much worse disease states. And so it's been very frustrating. We've got all of this information, all these tools that we know will help deal with infection, and it just doesn't seem to be an issue or a topic of interest for some reason. So yeah, D2 is the plant form, the plant produced form. D3, and for the most part, if we're living with enough sun exposure, most of our vitamin D is going to come from our skin exposure to the sun. It's a specific wavelength of UV light that, like 10 to 15 minutes a couple times a week in shorts and a t-shirt. One of the rules of thumb that I give to people is about half the time it takes you to sunburn is the amount of time to get a good amount of vitamin D. So people are asking me, well, how much sunscreen should I use or what should I do? I'll tell them, all right, go your first 15 minutes, 20 minutes without sunscreen out in the sun, and then put the sunscreen on. That way you get your vitamin D exposure, and then you don't get skin cancer. Everything in life is a trade-off, right? Yeah. So we do get vitamin D3 in our diet as well because it's the animal form. But most of our vitamin D in our body we're going to produce in response to light. Vitamin D deficiency, inadequate exposure to sunlight, inadequate vitamin D in the diet. Vitamin D is converted into several forms in the body. The first form is converted in the liver, the second in the kidney. So if you've got liver or kidney issues, that limits your vitamin D production to the active form. It's tough to give yourself vitamin D intoxication. Really, you have to have vitamin D intoxication. The only cases that I've seen of that are like little kids that get into the medicine cabinet gummies, right? You've got the little vitamin D gummies, and the kids like just start eating it as candy. And you do that enough, you can give yourself a vitamin D intoxication, and that's not fun. That's not good. So yeah, vitamin D deficiency, major thing in a lot of parts of the world, especially as we spend more time indoors, in front of screens, less time outdoors being active. So yeah, about, what did I say? 42-ish, somewhere 40-something% of the US vitamin D deficient. If you focus specifically on the Black community or folks with darker skin, it's like 80-something% vitamin D deficiency. And here in the Bay Area, most people that I've talked with, or in the San Francisco area, it's cloudy enough and we're far enough away from the equator that vitamin D deficiency is a thing for most people I've talked to, checked in with here in the Bay Area. So something for us to keep in mind. So yeah, the biologically active form of vitamin D is this dihydroxy form, the 125 dihydroxy form. But there are a ton of other vitamin D forms and we have no idea what they do. Like this 24-25 dihydroxy form, I still have not found what that does. But this is generally the synthesis process of vitamin D. It's either absorbed in the diet or absorbed because of light, processed by the liver to convert into the 1-hydroxy form, processed by the kidneys to produce the dihydroxy form or other forms as well. And then this is the form that impacts our calcium levels in our body and facilitates parathyroid hormone activity. So what does it do? In the intestines, it increases calcium and phosphate absorption. For the bone, it facilitates the action of parathyroid hormone, facilitates both breakdown of bone and synthesis of bone. Kidney, it promotes calcium and phosphate reabsorption, and just generally regulates good calcium levels for neuromuscular activity. So here we can see effective parathyroid hormones and vitamin D and all of this. So you've got plasma calcium levels that we're trying to maintain at constant levels. Calcium is being used both for our neural activity as well as bone mineralization, strengthening of bone. Here's vitamin D here playing a role in calcium absorption in the intestine, reabsorption in the kidney, as well as bone breakdown. And here's parathyroid hormone also. Vitamin D facilitates the activity of parathyroid hormone. Together, they're responsible for keeping our calcium levels sufficient to provide enough calcium for everything. Now, these are traditionally what's been the recommended daily dose. I have a feeling when the smoke clears after all of this, the recommended daily dose is going to go up, especially the further away you are from the equator. So if you're in an area where your shadow is generally taller than you are, your recommended daily dose is probably going to be in the thousands. I mentioned when we were doing our vitamin D lectures earlier, it's this hydroxy form that is the longest lived. You'll notice it has the highest reference range in the body, right? The base D2 and D3 forms, small concentration. The 125 dihydroxy form, that has a half-life of only a few hours, so it doesn't get really high concentration. So generally, your vitamin D tests are going to be measuring this guy.